So I want to talk about an important topic that I think a lot of businesses aren't really grasping, is that they use the term website. I need to build my website, but it's not a website. Your website is a software, and you need to start thinking about your website as a software. And once you kind of wrap your head around what that means and what it takes to really truly run a successful software, I think you'll be a lot more successful with your business and leveraging your website as a true asset and competitive advantage. So let me talk quickly about why your website is a software. So first is you've probably heard of these platforms: WordPress, Shopify, Magento, even Wix, or some of the cheaper, do-it-yourself platforms. But all of these are software. And even if you use a framework like Laravel, you're using a software. So when you're building a website with any of these things, you're building a software. And what's important to realize is that when you're building a software, you need software engineers. And these are talented individuals who can demand high salaries. So before you go off and maybe use the low bidder on your project, think more about what does it really take to run a software. And that obviously requires software engineers. And these are talented, high demand individuals that get paid well. So you should really think about how much you need to pay to run your software. And it's usually maybe a little bit more than you think, but if you make that investment properly, it'll really come back to help you. The other thing that people forget about is that software requires development operations, and this is kind of this behind the scenes thing that most businesses don't really understand. What is development operations? But it's the process of actually getting code onto your website. So before you just willy-nilly launch new code on your website or to launch a new feature, you need to make sure that's tested. You need to make sure that there's a process for managing the variances in the software and the code changes, and all this kind of falls into DevOps. Same thing with hosting. So all of this DevOps kind of operational processes are really important to running a good software. So it's important to understand the value of DevOps when running your website or software. The other important thing to think about is that software requires quality assurance. Quality assurance is always underinvested in. It's always undervalued, and people say, "Oh, we'll get it done in a week." I mean, you should really give yourself quite a bit of time to QA or test your website before you launch any new features or the new website itself. So software requires quality assurance. Don't underestimate that. It takes time, and there's a reason if someone's saying it's going to take 4 months, it's because maybe 3 months is building and 1 month is quality assurance. You've got to make time for that. The other kind of thing that people just neglect is that software requires quality software engineers, and frankly, it's an expensive market out there. Doesn't mean you have to get the highest high-end San Francisco Bay Area engineers, but ultimately good engineers are expensive, and we've worked with engineers all around the world. We've worked with engineers in almost every single continent, and the good ones are just fairly expensive. Obviously, a good software engineer in maybe a lower cost of living area is a little bit less expensive. So that's a good way to save some money, is to find some people that maybe have a lower cost of living to kind of get a little more value. But ultimately, they are fairly expensive. Even in other so-called cheaper areas, you still need to kind of spend a little bit more than you might think.